Kenneth Parks is a killer who stabbed his in-laws to death in the middle of the night. Despite confessing what he'd done, he was acquitted. Why? He was sleepwalking. In his trial, the jury reasoned that since he was asleep while he carried out the murder, he had no choice in the matter, and so he could not be held responsible for something he didn't choose to do. But what about free will? If we don't have free will, none of us can choose our actions either. So can we be held responsible for any crime we commit? And what does that imply for our current justice system? Today, we will be discussing the inherent flaws with the current fairness approach. Before we talk about how free will affects our morals, we have to first define what free will actually is. That's actually a harder task than you'd think. In fact, it seems that whether you're a compatibilist or an incompatibilist changes your definition of it. The common definition of free will is the capacity for an agent to choose its own actions. Of course, by that definition, animals also have free will, except maybe not all of them. And if there's anything you should know about me, is that I hate arbitrary shit, and this is the most arbitrary something can get. It's hard to determine the existence of something that isn't really clearly defined, but in any case, this thought experiment is completely pointless if free will does exist. Thankfully, or not, depending on how you look at it, there's no evidence at all to suggest free will exists. It would take a whole episode or two to talk about why free will doesn't exist, but here are just a few reasons. If none of these convince you, that's okay. Let's just imagine that every effect has a cause and we humans don't originate our own cause. Now, let's go back to the case of the amazing sleepwalking killer. How do we apply his case to free will? Well, the reasoning goes that Mr. Parks had no choice in what he was doing. It was going to happen no matter what, and nobody could do anything about it unless someone could somehow tell the future or something. How could you punish somebody for something they have no control over? Well, without free will, that applies even to conscious people. So now it's time to play
Name That Fallacy.
The syllogism is technically actually valid. Certainly, the absence of free will checks all the boxes. The problem is with the connection between responsibility and the justification of punishment. If a crime can't be held against a criminal because the crime was inevitable, you can apply that same logic to a judge. After all, an unfair sentencing for a crime is just as inevitable as the crime itself. Applying an argument to one thing but not another is special pleading. In fact, applying the non-existence of free will, you can justify pretty much anything. One that comes particularly to mind is slavery, which holds especially strong because you can't take away someone's freedom if freedom is an illusion in the first place. We could also apply our argument to positive things. We would no longer have any reason to reward or pay each other for good deeds either. I don't even need to thank you for subscribing, because you are obviously compelled to not only do that, but click the notification bell too. You know, this almost makes me think that maybe, just maybe, morality is not based in objectivity, but rather human preference. Imagine that! The thing is, the no free will argument is actually true in that there's never any reason to punish anyone for the sake of making them pay responsibility, which is another word for revenge. But that gets us no closer to what we should do so we can keep order in society. At this point, some self-described pragmatists would say,
well, let's just act as if free will exists anyway. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
But a big problem with that mentality is that fixes that don't fall in line with reality tend to be really clumsy. You see, judging responsibility for the purpose of punishment is only applicable in retributive justice, which is exactly what it sounds like. But not only does this remove context from everything, it doesn't work. Let's suppose, hypothetically of course, that there are poor people starving on the street today. Eventually, they get desperate and turn to theft to feed themselves.
So we lock them up and call it a day. If we punish people who break laws, they'll think twice before doing it again. They deserve it anyway.
Oh really? You really think they won't steal again to fill their stomachs in the future? Are we evil for wanting to survive? Robin Hood here thinks he has no choice. Starting to see a theme here? Retributive justice doesn't give the context necessary to tell who deserves what, and it doesn't always work either. Because retributive justice has a focus on the past, any improvement you see in the future is purely incidental. What the? Not again!
God bless the United States. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Just look at this. America has the highest concentration of incarcerations per capita in the entire world. You know you messed up when not even Russia's gulag can keep up with you. This also reflects the United States' tendency in general to spend most of its time punishing criminals rather than rehabilitating them. But the United States' actual crime rate is no lower than the progress-oriented European countries. But hey, America's prison industry works great. After all, the freer the market, the freer the people. And that brings us to utilitarianism. Utilitarians don't give a damn about who deserves what or what they think is fair. Rather, we're only worried about learning from the past to improve the future. It's almost as if making the world better is the entire purpose of justice. Utilitarianism involves rehabilitating people to become useful members of society. Punishment is still used to keep people from committing crime, but the key here is why we do it that makes it philosophically sound. It doesn't matter if you're responsible for your own actions, it only matters that you're not a threat to society moving forward. You might be noticing that these principles should be really obvious, and it's easy enough to understand when you apply it to non-human justice. Sure, these locusts are only eating our crops to stay alive. They aren't evil or anything, but that sure won't stop us from spraying those fuckers with Raid. When it comes to people though, we can't seem to wrap our tiny little heads around doing what works. We just need to make sure those filthy criminals get what's coming to them. You could argue that Mr. Parks here doesn't deserve to be punished, free will or not, and you'd kind of be right. But Parks was also a gambler who fell into debt and had previously tried embezzlement. His psychological state probably extended beyond just his sleepwalking and contributed to the nighttime murder. The fact that Mr. Parks was asleep doesn't mean he didn't do anything wrong, and the jury failed to recognize that in his current psychological state, he could very well become a sleepwalking serial killer. On the other hand, Mr. Hood here has what seems to be perfect control of his own actions. But if the past only suggests he will break the law when he is desperate, the best solution is to give him no reason to break the law in the first place. A good program which gives him support to get him on his feet and become productive will do the trick. And if you think about it, shouldn't we be doing that anyway? Why wait until after these guys turn to theft? Instead, today, ex-convicts have a hard time finding jobs, which makes them poorer, and that perpetuates the cycle. Overall, as we should have expected, free will and whether you accept that it exists or not doesn't directly tell us how we should determine what is right and wrong. Our lack of free will doesn't remove the need for a justice system, and recognizing that doesn't lead us necessarily to the right answer. But philosophical questions can still help us identify the basic ideologies shaping our policies. Reducing the justice system to its most simple terms makes its fundamental flaws obvious. The solution itself really isn't complicated. Use the past as a learning tool, not as an instrument for revenge. As an out-of-context Kylo Ren would say,
No, you're still holding on! Let go!
"Suck it, Disney. Educational content is fair use." It took us 4 videos, but we finally made a philosophy video with practical implications. I can't stress how important it is to break down everything you encounter in your everyday life into its basic components like we have done in this video. Only then will you realize that our entire world is basically complete bullshit. Enough to make a whole YouTube channel out of it, in fact. The link to download the soundtrack for free is in the description below. Any donations you can make will help me pay for college. See you next week. Or not. The average viewer only watched 2 videos on this channel, so.
I'm and I approve this message.